All right, so my article was about when does childhood end and adulthood begin? And I found this article on The Atlantic, and it was just an interesting piece on the ambiguity that we deal with on when do we consider someone to be an adult and when does that transition happen?
Mm.
And the issues that come up is that in cases of, unfortunately, murder, pedophilia. I'm in a debate group, and one of my fellow admins in the group just happened to mention that after the passing of David Bowie, that he had been accused of having relations with a young lady when she was like 14 or 15 years old back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone went ballistic, and it came down to a discussion of, but when does this child have that opportunity? When does that child own his or her own body and can make those adult decisions about that sort of thing? And we have so much ambiguity in our society on that topic, just in our laws. I mean, for instance, you can't buy alcohol until you're 21, but you can join the military at 18 and buy cigarettes at 18. You can start working at 14, and you can go see adult movies at 17 without supervision. So we don't have any sort of consensus to work with. But what that ends up doing is that it leaves a lot of leeway for our justice system to kind of pick and choose who they, determine to be an adult at certain times. And when it comes to sentencing, people of color, especially African Americans, are sentenced harsher at a younger age because of this ambiguity.
Because we're seen older than what we really are.
Right. And one of the things the article picked up, it says, what sort of markers should we use to determine that you have crossed over into adulthood? And one of the things that it mentioned was our physical bodies. And I have to say that typically, or generally, I should say, not typically, but generally, African American people tend to be a little bigger, a little more muscular, maybe a little taller, a little heavier. So we're visually seen as more adult even when we're children, because when we see Tamir Rice in that video, those of us here in this room probably saw a child. But the general public looks at that and sees a teenager, a man. I mean that was a child. But his physical stature, we'll hear it talks about when the police officer makes his report. And let me just say, I say the police officer makes his report because it sounds like they all use the same report. He was huge. He was big. He was coming at me. And it's always the same thing. So if we're always seen as adults, we lose that innocence of childhood. And when our children are getting in trouble, they are punished at a harsher rate. I'm looking at numbers from this Fair Sentencing for Youth organization. Back in 2009, they reported that 84% of the people with life, or that were sentenced to life without parole, were African American. And then one of the other terms that they use, and I want you to listen to the wording on this, is life without the possibility of parole. And these children have just been thrown away because they aren't seen as children. They are not given that leeway. And it said something like in 2005 that when they looked in the justice system, we're seeing that equally 25% of the I hate to say, or people committing crimes or whatever are white and 25 were black, but only 9.6% of the white children ended up being sentenced as adults. Over a third of the black children are being sentenced as adults and getting these sentences of life with parole or without parole or life without the possibility of parole. I mean, that means that's the point of no return for a child.
So, Pam, you mind if I jump in there?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that it's the concept of, in general, it's a societal framework where we decide that a certain person is a certain age and they're capable, and not a numerical age, but a mental age where they're capable of being responsible for themselves and
Right.
responsible for those actions. And so I hear you connecting the David Bowie thing. We talked about that at length on my show. Actually, one of my Progressive Army members really pushed back on my hypocrisy. But anyway, I digress. We talked about that because, here he is as an adult, almost in his 21, 22 at the time, messing with a child that's 14, and in certain circumstances we allow that to slide because of our perception of the girl in that incident. We may see her as being older, and then you're saying that in another scenario altogether that could be deadly for a young black guy who is seen older. So what is your main takeaway from that? Should we view, are we even capable of viewing people as children simply by how they look? What do we take from it?
Well, my thought is that we probably need to start a system when our children are going to the doctor to begin with. That we start looking at the maturity level. Just like when there's a trial, when something happens, then you want to bring psychologists in and jump in and try to take 2 or 3 little psychologist meetings and determine the maturity level of this child, as opposed to us following that child from birth to whenever, so that we have an idea of that individual child's mental state that we can go back and follow a trail on, as opposed to letting the justice system come in at an inopportune moment and just decide if that particular person should be considered a child or an adult under the circumstances. If we have this record that we can track back from birth on, now we have a better understanding of where that individual is. And then we have something that we can focus on and take the focus off of skin color.
Okay, so let me unpack what you're saying then. All right. Okay. So are you saying that in cases of statutory let's say consent for sex, statutory rape cases, that should be viewed on an individual basis instead of a blanket cutoff at the age of 17 or 18?
I do. And part of the reason for that is that, I'm a mother of 2 daughters, but I'm a mother of a son. I was also a 14-year-old girl who ended up marrying at 17 the guy she started dating at 14. And looking at the difference in myself at 14, my 2 daughters at 14, and my son at 14, you've got 4 different people. It's not a blanket answer. And what ends up happening, unfortunately, is that our young black men are put in jail when they're boys based on something that is so arbitrary. And we really need to get an understanding of where maturity comes from, and we can't just look at somebody's body. Someone's body can be very mature, and their brain is not there yet.
I agree with that 100%, that last thing you said. But doesn't that open up the door for like a reverse? Couldn't that amplify the problem if we say we're looking at them on an individual basis? Wouldn't it be
my thoughts exactly?
Wouldn't it be better for us to say, like in the case for young offenders, to say that we're not going to give anyone underneath the age of 18 a life sentence, versus saying let's look at this on a one-by-one basis, and that opens the door for them to say there were guys in Florida who are still in jail now, who went to jail when we were in high school because of they were playing around wrestling and they accidentally killed a girl in a wrestling match. And so they're serving life, but it's because they viewed them as an adult. It's like it's that discretion to try people as an adult. If we open up that door, couldn't it really make it worse?
I guess the problem that we're facing is that we don't know which way to turn that's going to make it any better for our community. And if we're going to throw down a blanket age, we run the risk of
capturing
people, because where are we going to make that line?
So you're saying, like, if we throw it at 18, then we may get a 21-year-old who really is a 13-year-old in development.
Right, and then that young black man ends up in jail, and then we can reverse that. It's one of those things. If we're going to throw a line down, we better be very, very sure that line is going to work the majority of the time, and not be something that's so fluid that we can't just argue it away. And when I say that we need to keep a record from the medical standpoint, I don't mean that we'll go by that only. But I'm just saying so we have some sort of groundwork if and when the situation comes up.
Pam, I'm gonna mess with you for a second. Are you trying
I
to?
knew you would.
Are you trying to make room for David Bowie to be okay to have sex with that 14-year-old girl because of how mentally mature that girl was and how she was not only grown but really manipulative in making that sexual encounter happen? Are you saying that we should not care that she was 14? We need to look at the fact that she was an adult in her mind?
No, and I'm saying the opposite. As a feminist, it really flies in my face that we have to decide when someone actually owns their own body. And when is she allowed to make that call for herself? I did not read those articles that Kevin provided for us in group, so I don't really have a sense of where she was mentally at all.
Oh no, she was there. She was grown in her mind, right? She, without a doubt, like she was acting in the story. She was carrying herself like a 21-year-old woman, right? She was still a 14-year-old girl. I do like your question in terms of in the feminist framework. When does a human, not just a woman, but when does a human own their own body? And then I think we have to divide it also and say when does a human and a person own their actions? Like when can we treat their actions as a product of them as a person versus the product of them as a child who's in development? I think we have to separate, in my opinion, I would say we would have to separate those things, those two things there, and say that we would treat each of those differently, because I think you can have a I don't know, maybe it's the same thing, maybe it's not different. I don't know. I mean, my brain is just going right now.
Well, I mean, and it can go either way, but I mean, we really need to address it because we are so ambiguous in how we determine what that age should be. Because we'll look in the world. Go ahead, JP. I'm sorry.
What I was going to say is I think you hit the nail on the head right there, because we want to look at this as an age, not a place, because age does not speak maturity. But yet for us, we love numbers. We love concrete things. So we like to say that you can't get your driver's license before you're 16. And so we love the concreteness of it. And so anything that throws off our system where we can't compartmentalize it becomes a difficulty. And I agree, especially with my children. I was a whole different type of child than the children that are growing up in this house.
Right.
I'm just the truth. I'm just going to tell the truth today. But the idea is that so I agree. I think it's something that we need to look at. The other part of it is that do we trust science enough to help us with this? Especially because there is some stigma in the African American community as it comes to dealing with therapy, as it comes to people looking at us from that cognitive standpoint, and how do we move that issue forward?
And that's something else that we definitely need to get over, and that's a whole other topic, is the way we tend to shelter our mentally ill within our community, but then when they interact with the law, we can't be there to step in and protect them.
I want to ask the babyface killer that we have in the room. We have a young man who is quite the writer, and when I tell you his age, if it's okay, Will, for me to tell him your age, if not, just say no. But when I tell him your age, I don't want you guys to take him lightly, because when I tell you he is a killer writer, such that I brought him on the team because he's a writer. Is it okay if I tell him your age, Will?
Yeah, go ahead.
Will is 16 years old.
No.
Nice.
The babyface rhetorical killer is what I call him.
Wow, I would have never guessed that from reading him. Your articles are wow, spot on.
Yeah, he is great. I mean, he was up at 1 o'clock this morning writing about what happened in Jakarta, in Indonesia with ISIS, and was ready to publish at 1:50 in the morning, and I was asleep. So so it didn't get published at 8 a.m. But anyway, that's besides the point. I want to throw it over to Will. Tell me what you think about this thing about. Do you feel that it should be a cutoff age that age and nothing more, or do you feel like in you and your friends and people at your school, their development, that is so different that we need to look at it at a more nuanced level versus a hard line?
Okay, well, to be quite honest with you, I was only half listening to the conversation, but from what I'm understanding, hey, I'm 16. But from what I'm understanding and I'm listening, I think that there shouldn't be a solid cutoff line for this sort of stuff, you know. I mean, there's always going to be some sort of influx on every situation. Every situation needs to be looked at individually, and so you can't. There can't just be blanket statements like I think someone else was saying. There just can't be blanket solutions because not everything is completely. Not every situation is exactly the same. I mean, that goes for so many things in life. You can't just do that.
So you feel, so you feel like if you take a sample of your classmates, right? Let's take a sample of all the people in your school. You feel that cutting everyone off at saying 16 to drive or 18 to smoke or 21 to drink, that there's so much variations in it that cutoff is almost useless, and it doesn't really okay, here it is. It's going to hold some people back that are ready to go further, and then it's going to let some people go who aren't ready yet. Is that kind of what you feel?
Yeah, but I mean that's also very hard to that's hard to implement. You can't, say, okay, this person's ready to drive and this person is not. This person's ready to drink, this person is not. So I think that when you're doing this stuff, you really just need. I mean, you can't apply it in those sorts of situations all the time, but
you're
well,
fine.
here's where I'm going with this, and let me just say, if we had a hard line and we stuck to it, and we said, okay, anyone under the age of 25 is sentenced this way, and everyone's 25 and over.
No, BS. That can't be the case.
Bear with me a second.
Yeah.
And everyone over 25 is sentenced that way, and that line stayed a solid line across the board.
Yeah.
We would have less of an issue. But what tends to happen is because we don't want our justice system to become inflexible where a judge can't make an individual call on a case. But then what happens is that when that person in front of the judge is a person of color or a person of a certain financial stature, not having the representation in court, then there's this adjusting that happens anyway on an individual basis. It begins to bite us in the end more so. So if we either need that hard line and it needs to not be able to move, and then we get into a scary place with our justice system where a judge can't bring compassion into the courtroom.
Yeah.
Let me jump in.
I think I see two things here.
Hold on for a second.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hold on for a second, Ben. This is the progressive takeover, and I'm taking over. Ben, hit the applause button.
I don't have. Let me see if I can find one. Hang on.
It's broken. I thought.
Can we clap? Can we clap, y'all? Pam, great article. Great. All right. Hey, listen. My name is JP, and my job today is to watch the clock, and we want to make sure we get all these Army soldiers have an opportunity to get their stuff out here. So let's keep this thing rolling. So come on, y'all. You know how we do it.